Hi, today I want to talk about my top 10 books of all time. So these are my top 10 favorite books. Some of these I read when I was a kid, and then some of these I've read pretty recently. So to jump right into it, number 10 for me is The Old Man and the Sea, Ernest Hemingway. This book I read when I was in 8th grade, and it just made a big impression on me at the time. It's part of the reason why I fell into love with reading. And I think I've been trying to think about what makes this book so special to me. I think really that it's the way that Hemingway constructed the book. It allows the reader, it allows me as the reader to make my own impression on it. And that's, I guess, true with any great book, but with Hemingway here in The Old Man and the Sea, he gives you just barely enough information about the characters, the main character, the old man, and his friend, the little boy, and the setting. He gives you enough information to go on about what the old man is trying to do, what motivates him. And then the rest is up to you as the reader. And I think that's really the genius about this book, and that you as the reader can incorporate this book really easily into your own world and make it your own. And I think that's what makes it so great. It has this very simple style. It's everything you need and nothing you don't, and that's what I love about it. So the next book on the list is Martian Timeslip by Philip K. Dick. This book is a science fiction novel, a classic science fiction book about one of the things that Philip K. Dick writes a lot about is like these working class protagonists. And I think the main character in here is a plumber that goes to Mars, and he has a house and a family, and he finds himself wrapped up in this kind of conspiracy theory, or wrapped up in this plot with the mob, the local mob on Mars. And it's in Philip K. Dick fashion, the plot gets increasingly crazy as the book goes on. And the ending to this book is really why I put it on this list, because Philip K. Dick, he has a knack for writing these really crazy endings, and the ending to this just blew me away. And all of his, so if you've read Man in the High Castle and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, all those books have great endings, great twist endings, especially Man in the High Castle. And the ending to this book is kind of like that. And you don't see it coming, and it puts the entire rest of the book into question, and it's really good. So I love Martian Timeslip. The next book on the list is a Strugatsky brothers book called 1 Billion Years to the End of the World. And this book is about, it sounds kind of a little bit boring of a concept for a book, but it's about a academic researcher that's in his Russian apartment interacting with his friends and what his daily life is like, basically. And the reason I like this book so much is because of the humor. It's really funny, and I think that's what set it apart for me. I read Roadside Picnic by the Strugatskys, and it was a good book, but I wasn't totally enamored with it. It was, I guess, it was more of a fantasy book than this book, but I guess there just wasn't enough to sink my teeth into with Roadside Picnic. Whereas this book, it's not that complicated in the way of science fiction or anything, but it's more about the human element, and it's about the limits of science, and the way when we use science to understand the world, we're not getting a complete picture, and we're lucky to have science, but science can't explain everything. And that's kind of, I think, at the core of what this book is about. But I love the Strugatsky, this book. I want to read more by them. I've only read those two. So the next book on the list is Yukio Mishima, The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. This is a great little novel about a 13-year-old boy and his band of friends that run the town. They live in this seaside town, and it's about the boy's relationship with his struggling mother, and his relationship with his mother's boyfriend. And it's, I guess what makes this book special is that Mishima has this unique approach to making the characters come to life, and he's really the only writer where I've experienced so much familiarity with the characters, and just from page one. And I guess any great writer can do that, but Mishima does have this unique approach to characters with this book, and you feel right away that you're best friends with all the characters. And there's certain things in this book that, just certain scenes that are really special, and I believe it's told from a couple different perspectives, but it was just grading it purely on prose and the reading experience, it was amazing. It was a really good book. So I loved the Mishima book. Next book on the list is The Hobbit by Tolkien. Everyone knows this book. This book I also read as a kid. I read this when I was 10 years old for the first time. And the chapter Riddles in the Dark, where Bilbo and Gollum are telling riddles to each other in Gollum's cave, that really, I was totally enamored with that when I read it for the first time. And every time I've reread it since then, it still holds up even now. And the chapter where the hobbits are going in the barrels going down the river, I really like. And the chapter with Smaug and Bilbo, that really stuck with me. And it's just, there's not a lot more I can say about it that everyone else hasn't said. It's just a classic fantasy book that made an impression on me early in life. And it's one of those books that made me fall in love with reading. And with The Hobbit, I think with The Hobbit and the case of Old Man and the Sea too, I pretty much, the only reason they're on this list is out of nostalgia, basically, that I have a special place in my heart for these books, those two anyway. But all these books are special to me. Next book on the list is Dashiell Hammett, Red Harvest. This is a hardcover that has his 5 big books in it, along with The Maltese Falcon. I think what makes Red Harvest so special to me is that I'm fascinated with the Pinkerton agent that goes into this strange town, this rural town, and it kind of feels like mob era New York, even though it's in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And there's just this Pinkerton agent. He starts uncovering all these conspiracies that, or actually starts the ball rolling of this. It's almost like a natural force coming upon this town and just wiping it out. It's amazing how how parts of the plot unfold over the course of the book, and I was fascinated with it. And it's really rereadable too. All these books I've read more than once, and Red Harvest is really good. It's probably not quite as good as The Maltese Falcon, although I like it better because of what I said just about the Pinkerton agent and the little town, the small town setting, I think makes it special. And I definitely want to read more Dashiell Hammett. I really like crime books. I like Raymond Chandler, but Red Harvest is special to me specifically. And then the next book on the list is Soldier's Garden by Jack Vance. I read this book after reading the first 4 novels in the Song of Ice and Fire series. And wow, talk about an influence. This book is what we would call grimdark fantasy today. This was published in 1981 or 82, and it had a huge influence on George R.R. Martin. And I think he's been pretty transparent about his influences, Jack Vance and some others. But it's about a princess that her father is kind of an antagonistic type of character that's tyrannical, rules over this kingdom. It takes place in this fictional island off the coast of France in fictional Europe. And it's about her having this secret garden that she can go to hide from the reality of her situation. And she has all these arranged marriages that don't work out. And then from a neighboring kingdom, a prince washes up on the shores of her kingdom, and they have a relationship together. And then the prince, once people find out who he is, they try to capture him, and all this stuff happens. I won't get into spoilers, but the book eventually becomes about the prince trying to track down his son and find his son, and his son's captured by fairies that live in this forest. And it's just fascinating. And what really makes this special, and I like fantasy books in general, but Jack Vance has a way with prose that just sets this book apart, I think, and just makes it, it's really smooth to read. He has all this, there's all these funny scenes that happen, and you get the signature Jack Vance humor and an inappropriate style humor that's really funny at times. And those are what made it special to me. The next book on the list is The Terror by Dan Simmons. This is a kind of half historical fiction, half horror novel. It's about the 1845 Franklin expedition. They were part of the British Navy that was tasked with finding a northwest passage to China. So they sailed west of Greenland, and then they were looking for a way through the ice to China, but they end up getting stuck in the ice for several winters, and they start running out of food and running out of ammunition, and they start running out of alternatives to make it back home, because they quickly find out they're not going to find a Northwest Passage, or there may not even be one with all this ice. And so they're relying on these tinned cans for fresh fruit to curb scurvy and the symptoms of it, for anti-scorbutic like food. And they find out some of the solder joints on the tins went bad, and so most of their food goes bad, and so they start dying of scurvy. And with the initial symptoms of scurvy are just like a minor headache and irritation, but the advanced symptoms are so much worse. Your body basically eats itself from the inside, and you start slowly to lose your mind, and any loud noise or bright light will throw you into a frenzy. And these sailors are already in an increasingly desperate situation, and they find out that pretty early on in this book that the ice might have damaged the hull of the ship, and so they might not even be able to sail back home. And their only way back to civilization potentially is this route across the Hudson Bay over the ice in winter to upriver to a fur trading settlement, I believe, in northern Canada. And so they try to make it there. And it's just an amazing, the amount of research that would go into writing a book like this is just staggering. And Dan Simmons has this way of bringing to life all the characters, not just the characters that he writes, but characters like sailors in the 1840s. How would they talk and what their worldview would be like? It would seem probably pretty rudimentary compared to us today, and that's exactly how they read, and exactly how you would expect a sailor from this time period to understand the world. That's exactly how these characters read, and it's genius. And there's a abominable snowman in it that I love, that makes the book special. And the sailors just call it the creature because they don't know what it is, or there's all these conspiracy theories they come up with about why they're being attacked. If some people think they're being punished by God that's sending this Yeti to eat everybody, and some people think it's just maybe a polar bear that's starving to death, that's trying to eat for food. Some people think there's this Eskimo woman that they bring on to travel with them on the expedition, and she has this relationship with this creature that they don't understand, that maybe they think maybe she's working with the creature to kill everybody or something. And it's just fascinating. And when you're reading the book, you come up with all these theories of what's happening and why the Yeti is attacking all these men. And it's just really good. It's it's slow going at first, and it doesn't focus on one central character until about halfway through the book or a little later. But around that time is when all this momentum starts picking up with the plot, and the situation becomes really desperate. And it's great as a horror book, and it just works. It's really good. And then, so the next book on the list is Lust for Life by Irving Stone. This was published in the 1930s, and it's a biography of Van Gogh, of course. And it's really, I think what makes it special to me is that it's about all of the characters that Van Gogh met and came into his life that shaped him into the person he would be, and all the situations, the desperate situations that he found himself in over the years. It starts out in London and The Hague when Van Gogh was a clergyman. He would travel to all these different communities in Europe and talk to people about the Christian faith, essentially. And he finds himself in this part of rural Belgium, I believe, called the Borinage, where all these rural peasants work in this, I believe it's a coal mine, and because it's the only place of employment in the area. And it's such a miserable existence for these people, and people are maimed and disfigured, and they work in the mine until they die, basically, because the survival age is probably like 30 or something. And it's so, the working conditions are so bad, and there's child labor going on, and it's miserable. And he finds that he starts painting landscapes and some of these people and showing them their picture after he paints them. And he finds that the paintings are actually more cathartic to these people than what he can do as a clergyman. And I think that's what sets him on this path as a painter. And he, through his brother, he learns more and more about how the art world works, because he knew nothing about it at the time. Even I think at 30 years old, he had very limited knowledge of how to paint, or how you sell your own paintings, or where to go to collaborate with other artists. And then the book goes to Paris, and talks about all of his collaborations and things that he learned from other artists in the art movement at the time. And Paris was a fascinating place in the 1880s when, because of course it was this huge mecca of art, and all this money was flooding into the art world at the time, that to the point where there were fathers that had families that were just leaving their families to be part of this, to try their luck as painters and artists, because there was just, it was a kind of a feast or famine situation. But the people that got recognition did really well, but the people like Van Gogh that struggled for years and years really had just a desperate life. And the book ends with Van Gogh in Saint Remy in rural France, and that was probably my favorite part of the book, where it's this really interesting setting, and it's just an excellent book. And Irving Stone's prose just really brings the setting to life in the way that I haven't read in another Van Gogh biography. And it's still an amazing book to this day. So the last book on the list, and this is probably my favorite book of all time, this is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I love mountaineering books, and so, for example, Dan Simmons, that wrote The Terror, he wrote this book called The Abominable, that's about a 1920s expedition to Mount Everest. And it's really good. It's a horror novel that has a supernatural element, like The Terror, but it's excellent. And this book is about the 1996 blizzard that on Mount Everest in the 1996 climbing season. And it was a storm of the century. So I believe it was a monsoon that started in the Indian Ocean, and the Himalayas are really close to that system, or the Indian Ocean, relatively speaking. And so when the storm got to the Himalayas, it turned into this once in a lifetime blizzard. And there were so many people on the mountain that day that were working. They were trying to get from the summit back to camp, back down to Camp 4 to safety when it hit. And a lot of people lost their lives that day. Some of them were the best climbers in the world at that time. Some of them were guides that were paid lots of money to bring people on the mountain and bring people to the summit. But so Jon Krakauer was a journalist at the time. He had, I think, cut his teeth climbing in the Alps in Europe, and wrote a book about that called Eiger Dreams that was really good, climbing in the Swiss Alps. And then he did a lot of climbing, I think, in Alaska before this. And so he was already a proven climber by this time. And he was paid by I believe a climbing magazine paid his way to be part of this team to climb Mount Everest. And he was, with the agreement being that he would, of course, write a story about the climb and publish it in the magazine. But after the events of what happened in the blizzard, he found out that one article is not going to cover the information. It really needs its own book, and this is not a short book. There's a lot of material in here. And I think Jon Krakauer really, why this book is so long, it's like it's almost 400 pages. He takes his time setting up the book, and I think that's the best approach to take, because to really, for this story to have the most impact, you have to understand the logistics of what it takes to climb Mount Everest. And so it's a little bit slow going, but it's because you have to understand all these logistics and how, if you want to climb Mount Everest, how do you do it? And so Jon Krakauer himself, when you wake up at Camp 4, you have very little time to get ready, climb up near the summit and get past the Hillary step, the really technical part right under the summit. And then you've got, 3 minutes or 8 minutes on the summit to celebrate before you have to start making your way down before the sun sets. And the increased risk of danger at that point, you know, is way, way worse at dark. So you've got very limited time to get back down to camp. And Krakauer himself was pretty lucky and got down quickly. He was amongst the first group, I think, to get back to camp. But a lot of people were stuck on their way back because they got stuck in a huge queue at the top, at the summit, and before they could start making their way back down. And one of the climax of this book, I think, and Krakauer is genius with this, and he makes Beck Weathers' story. So Beck Weathers was a cardiologist from Texas he was exposed to the worst part of the elements, that the people that perished and lost their lives, he was exposed to elements just as bad as that at night in the midst of the blizzard, 100-mile-per-hour plus winds, blizzard conditions where the snowfall density was so high that you could just walk off the edge of the mountain and not even know it. And so Beck Weathers was part of a group that decided to hunker down that night and wait until morning where they could actually see to walk to make it back to camp. And he was blown off this ridge into a pile of snow and was there, I think, for 12 hours, or the better part of 12 hours, until he stumbled into camp. And one of the guides or assistant guides that found Beck Weathers, by this time they thought he was dead. And the guide said he thought he saw a mummy walking into camp. That's how black his face was from gangrene and frostbite, that it looked like a zombie or a mummy walking into camp. And he was exposed to just horrible, terrible, horrific conditions on the mountain and somehow escaped with his life. And he can't really explain it to this day, what happened, other than some sort of supernatural element at play. But that's really the climax of this book, is Beck Weathers' story. And then he interviewed most or all of the people that survived for 2 different climb teams. He interviewed for this novel or this book, and it's just amazing. And it's, again, one of the most rereadable books. But so that's my top 10 list. Hope you enjoyed that video. Again, these are like my top 10 favorite books of all time, and this list changes depending on what I'm reading at the time. As you know, as readers, that your top 10 list probably changes all the time if you find a book that's really good. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.